The morning fog clung to the Quantico training grounds like smoke from a battlefield, thick and unforgiving. Through the haze, the crack of rifle fire echoed across the valley. Each shot a sharp punctuation mark in the pre-dawn silence. Ava Davis lay prone on the wet grass, her breathing steady despite the chaos erupting around her. The Barrett M82 rifle felt like an extension of her soul, its weight distributed perfectly across her small frame. At 23, she had already proven herself in ways that mattered, but not in ways the military brass cared to acknowledge. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. Davis, you're holding that rifle like you're afraid it's going to bite you. Colonel Harrison's voice boomed across the firing line, carrying the authority of 27 years in the Marines and the dismissive tone reserved for recruits he deemed hopeless. His polished boots stopped just inches from her head, close enough that she could smell the leather polish mixed with his morning coffee. Maybe stick to communications. Leave the real shooting to the men. The other recruits shifted uncomfortably. Sarah Chun, lying 3 positions down, caught Ava's eye and offered a barely perceptible shake of her head, a silent warning to let it slide. Marcus Rodriguez, positioned on Ava's right, whispered under his breath, "Don't take the bait, Ava. He's testing you." But Ava had heard variations of this speech her entire life. Growing up in rural Montana, she'd been the girl who wasn't supposed to hunt with her father because it was unladylike. She was the teenager who'd been told she was too small for the high school shooting team, despite outscoring every boy at tryouts. She was the college student whose ROTC instructor had suggested she pursue logistics instead of combat roles. His eyes lingering on her 5 feet 2 inches frame with barely concealed skepticism. The rifle scope showed a target, 800 meters downrange standard distance for these qualifications. Child's play for someone who'd been hunting elk in the Rockies since she was 12. But today felt different. There was electricity in the air, the kind that preceded storms or revelations. Ava had woken that morning from a dream about her grandfather, a World War II sniper whose Purple Heart sat in a place of honor on her childhood mantelpiece. In the dream, he'd handed her his old rifle and whispered, "Show them what Davis blood can do." "Sir," Ava's voice cut through the morning air with the clarity of mountain wind, "permission to attempt the 4,000-meter challenge target?" The entire firing line went silent. Even the instructors stopped their pacing. The 4,000-meter target was legendary at Quantico, a steel silhouette positioned on the far ridge that had never been hit during a training exercise. It was placed there more as a landmark than an actual target, a reminder of the theoretical limits of precision shooting. The record book showed only 3 confirmed hits at that distance in the base's entire history, all by seasoned snipers with decades of experience and specialized equipment. Colonel Harrison's laugh started, as a chuckle in his chest before erupting into full-throated amusement. "Davis, that target is 4 kilometers away. You'd need to account for wind drift, bullet drop, atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients, and the Coriolis effect. Do you even know what the Coriolis effect is? The rotation of the Earth affects the bullet's trajectory, sir. At 4,000 meters with a .50 caliber round, I'd need to adjust approximately 8.7 inches to the right, assuming standard atmospheric conditions." Ava's response was matter-of-fact, delivered while she made minute adjustments to her scope. "Current. Wind is 12 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature is 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure is 30. 15 inches of mercury. Humidity at 78% will slow the bullet slightly." The colonel's smile faltered slightly, but his arrogance remained intact. "Book knowledge is one thing, recruit. Practical application is another entirely. You want to embarrass yourself in front of the entire company. Be my guest." Around the firing line, whispers began to ripple through the assembled recruits and instructors. Someone mentioned that the rifle Ava was using, the standard issue Barrett, wasn't even properly zeroed for extreme long-range shooting. Another voice noted that she'd been using iron sights during the morning's exercises, refusing the advanced optics that most recruits requested. The morning sun was beginning to burn through the fog, creating thermals that would make long-distance shooting even more challenging. Sarah Chun found herself holding her breath. She'd known Ava for 6 weeks now, ever since they'd been assigned to the same barracks. In that time, she'd watched her roommate display an almost supernatural understanding of ballistics and weather patterns. Ava could predict rain by the way shadows fell differently through the windows. She could estimate distances with uncanny accuracy just by observing how sound carried across the training grounds. But 4,000 meters was beyond extreme. It was the realm of legend. Marcus Rodriguez remembered the first time he'd seen Ava shoot. It was during their second week of training, and she'd borrowed his personal rifle for an evening practice session. She'd fired 10 rounds at various distances, and when they'd gone downrange to check the targets, every single hole could have been covered by a silver dollar. He'd asked her where she'd learned to shoot like that, and she'd simply said, "Montana teaches you to make every shot count." The weapon itself seemed to respond to Ava's touch. The Barrett M82 was a formidable piece of engineering. A Dart M82 was a formidable piece of 82, semi-automatic anti-materiel rifle, capable of stopping light vehicles and penetrating body armor at extended ranges. In Ava's hands, it looked almost delicate, like a craftsman's tool rather than an instrument of war. She'd modified her grip slightly, her left hand positioned to provide maximum stability while allowing for natural body movement during breathing. Her cheek weld against the stock was perfect, creating a repeatable sight picture that had become second nature. Colonel Harrison consulted his range tablet, pulling up the ballistics calculator for curiosity's sake. Even with perfect conditions and optimal ammunition, the computer suggested a hit probability of less than 15% at 4,000 meters. With standard training ammunition and current weather conditions, that dropped to less than 5%. He'd seen Olympic shooters miss easier shots. He'd watched experienced snipers with custom rifles and hand-loaded ammunition struggle at half that distance. "The range is officially cold," he announced, his voice carrying across the valley. All other firing ceased immediately. Davis has requested permission to attempt the impossible. Anyone who wants to witness this display of overconfidence, gather round. Word spread quickly through the morning training rotations. Drill sergeants emerged from nearby buildings. Officers interrupted their morning briefings to witness what many assumed would be a spectacular failure. The base photographer arrived, apparently summoned by someone who thought the moment worth documenting. Whether for inspiration or humiliation remained unclear. Ava ignored the growing crowd. Her world had narrowed to the fundamentals: breathing, sight alignment, trigger control. She'd entered what her grandfather had called the zone, that mystical state, where time slowed and external distractions faded away. The target, invisible to the naked eye at this distance, appeared clearly, in her scope as a dark silhouette against the hillside. The math was complex, but the principles were simple. Gravity would pull the bullet down approximately 180 feet over the course of its flight. Wind would push it sideways by nearly 6 feet. The bullet would take almost 5 seconds to reach the target, during which the Earth's rotation would affect its path. Temperature, humidity, and air density would all play their roles in determining the final trajectory. But beyond the mathematics lay something more intangible: intuition, born from thousands of hours of practice. Understanding that came from growing up in a place where precision wasn't just sport, but sometimes necessity. Her father had taught her to read wind by watching grass move differently at various distances. Her grandfather's journal, which she'd studied religiously, contained observations about how morning thermals affected bullet flight in ways that ballistics computers couldn't calculate. "Whenever you're ready, Davis," Colonel Harrison called. Out, his tone suggesting he expected the charade to end quickly so the real training could resume. Ava's finger found the trigger. The Barrett's safety was already off, a round chambered, the scope adjusted to her calculations. Around her, the world held its breath. In the distance, a red-tailed hawk circled over the target area, riding thermals that spoke of wind patterns and air currents. Somewhere behind her, she could hear Sarah whispering what sounded like a prayer. The trigger broke with 4.5 pounds of pressure, clean and predictable. The rifle's recoil was substantial but manageable, absorbed by her body position and the weapon's muzzle brake. The .50 caliber round left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, beginning its long arc through the morning air. Time stretched as the bullet traced its path across the valley, carrying with it 23 years of determination, defiance, and skill that the military establishment had consistently underestimated. In the scope, the target wavered slightly, in the mirage created by temperature differentials. Then, clear as thunder, the distinctive ring of steel rang across the 4,000-meter distance. The sound took nearly 12 seconds to travel back to the firing line, but when it arrived, it carried with it the unmistakable confirmation of impact. The silence that followed was deafening. Colonel Harrison's range-finding binoculars confirmed what everyone had heard but few could believe. The steel target showed a fresh impact mark, center mass. The impossible had just become inevitable. "Holy shit," someone whispered, quickly followed by muttered apologies for the language. The base photographer's camera clicked rapidly, documenting the moment when military training doctrine encountered the reality of exceptional individual capability. But as impressive as the shot was, it raised more questions than it answered. How had a 23-year-old recruit from Montana developed skills that surpassed career snipers? Why had her previous range scores been merely excellent rather than extraordinary? And most troubling for the command structure, what other assumptions about capability and potential were about to be challenged? Colonel Harrison lowered his binoculars, his expression unreadable. Around the firing line, conversations buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Sarah Chun was openly grinning, her earlier worry transformed into fierce pride. Marcus Rodriguez shook his head in amazement, already planning the story he'd tell his family during his next phone call home. Ava remained in position, her eyes still pressed to the scope, watching the target sway slightly in the distance wind. The shot had been perfect, but perfection raised expectations. In her experience, exceptional performance was often met not with celebration, but with suspicion, skepticism, and demands to prove it wasn't a fluke. The morning fog was lifting now, revealing the full scope of the training ground stretching toward the horizon. In the growing light, questions multiplied like shadows. Would this moment change her trajectory through the military system? Would it open doors or create new obstacles? And somewhere in the back of her mind, a more personal question whispered. What would her grandfather think of this moment? As the crowd began to disperse and normal training rhythms resumed, one thing became clear. This shot at 4,000 meters wasn't just the end of a marksmanship exercise. It was the beginning of a story that would test every assumption about potential, prejudice, and the price of excellence in a system designed for conformity rather than exceptional individual capability. The barracks fell silent except for the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic breathing of sleeping recruits. Ava Davis sat on the edge of her narrow bunk, cleaning the Barrett M82 with the methodical precision her grandfather had taught her 15 years earlier. Each component was inspected, cleaned, and reassembled with the kind of care that spoke to deep respect for both the weapon and the craft. Sarah Chun watched from the adjacent bunk, recognizing the ritual as something more than routine maintenance. "Can't sleep again?" Sarah whispered, careful not to wake their bunkmates. Ava's hands never paused in their work. "Sleep is for people who don't have to prove themselves every single day." She held the bolt carrier group up to the light, examining it for any trace of fouling or wear. Besides, this rifle saved my reputation today. Least I can do is treat it right. The events of the morning had already begun to ripple through the base's social ecosystem. During lunch, conversations stopped when Ava entered the mess hall. Some looks were admiring, others skeptical. A few carried the weight of resentment, the unmistakable irritation of people who'd had their worldview challenged by inconvenient facts. Colonel Harrison had said nothing more about the shot after confirming the hit, but his expression had carried the promise of future scrutiny. Sarah rolled onto her side, studying her roommate's profile in the dim light. You know they're going to want you to do it again, right? One impossible shot could be luck. They'll want to see if you can repeat it. I know. Ava's response was quiet but certain. That's why I can't sleep. The truth was more complex then. Either fear or excitement. The shot at 4,000 meters hadn't been luck. It had been the culmination of skills developed through necessity rather than ambition. Growing up on a ranch 40 miles from the nearest town, precision shooting wasn't sport but survival. When winter storms could isolate the family for weeks, when a wounded elk could mean the difference between a filled freezer and hungry months ahead, every shot had to count. Her father, James Davis, had been a hunting guide who'd learned to read weather patterns with the intensity of a meteorologist and the intuition of someone whose livelihood depended on predicting nature's moods. Her mother, Elena, had been a mathematics teacher who'd approached shooting with the same analytical precision she brought to calculus problems. The combination had created an education in ballistics that few professional snipers received. His Purple Heart had been earned during the Battle of the Bulge, where he'd held a German advance for 6 hours with nothing but a Springfield rifle and an unshakable belief that some positions were worth dying to defend. Shooting isn't about the gun, little dove, he'd told 8-year-old Ava during her first lesson. It's about understanding that everything is connected: wind and gravity, temperature and humidity, your heartbeat and your breathing. Miss any piece, and you miss the target. By age 12, Ava could consistently hit prairie dogs at 600 yards. With her grandfather's ancient Remington 700, by 15, she was outscoring adult hunters at local competitions. By 18, she'd earned a full ROTC scholarship to Montana State University, not for her shooting ability, which she'd learned to downplay, but for her academic excellence and leadership potential. College had been a revelation in the wrong direction. Her ROTC instructors, well-meaning but conventional in their thinking, had pigeonholed her into communications and logistics tracks. When she'd requested sniper training consideration, Captain Morrison had smiled condescendingly and suggested she focus on areas better suited to your physical profile and gender. The phrase had haunted her through 4 years of academic excellence and military training that felt like an elaborate exercise in wasted potential. She'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in mathematics and a minor in atmospheric physics. But her military file still listed her primary skills as communications and administrative support. The disconnect between her capabilities and her official designation had become a source of constant frustration. Now, sitting in the pre-dawn darkness of the Quantico barracks, she wondered if one extraordinary shot had changed her trajectory, or simply painted a target on her back. Military bureaucracies weren't known for embracing individuals who challenged established assumptions, especially when those individuals were young women from rural backgrounds who'd never learned to accept limitations gracefully. "Tell me about Montana," Sarah said softly. She'd grown up in San Francisco, where the longest shooting range was 100 meters, and hunting meant driving to specialty restaurants. Her understanding of rural American gun culture was entirely theoretical. Ava's hands continued their methodical cleaning process, but her expression softened. "Montana is where you learn that comfort is temporary and capability is everything. Winter teaches you to prepare." Distance teaches you to be accurate, and silence teaches you to think before you act. She told Sarah about mornings when the thermometer read 30 below zero and the wind carved snow into sculptures that redefined the landscape overnight. She described the weight of responsibility that came with carrying a rifle into the wilderness, knowing that poor judgment could mean death for both hunter and prey. She talked about the meditation of long shots, the necessity of controlling heartbeat and breathing, while calculating trajectories that would make physics professors proud. Most people only learn mechanics. They never learn the art. Sarah listened with growing understanding. The woman sitting across from her wasn't just an exceptional marksman, she was someone who'd been systematically underutilized by a system that categorized people based on superficial characteristics rather than demonstrated capability. "What happened after you made that shot this morning?" Sarah asked. "I mean, with the instructors?" Ava paused in her cleaning routine, her expression growing thoughtful. "Colonel Harrison pulled me aside after the crowd dispersed. Asked me where I'd learned to shoot like that. When I told him about growing up in Montana, he got this look like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't understand." The conversation had been brief but loaded with implications. Harrison had asked about her previous range scores, which had been consistently excellent but not extraordinary. Ava had explained that she'd been shooting to meet standards rather than exceed them, a strategic choice based on her understanding of military culture's complex relationship with outlier performance. "He asked if I could repeat the shot," Ava continued. "I told him yes, given appropriate conditions and ammunition. Then he asked something that bothered me. He wanted to know if I'd ever considered that my talents might be better utilized in a different capacity." Sarah frowned. "What kind of different capacity?" "He suggested that someone with my skills might be valuable in specialized roles. Said there were programs that recruited individuals with exceptional capabilities for missions that required ... precision." Ava's voice carried uncertainty. It felt like a job interview disguised as a conversation. The implications were unsettling. Military special operations units were always recruiting, but they typically looked for specific psychological profiles as well as technical skills. The idea that one extraordinary shot might lead to a completely different career trajectory was both exciting and terrifying. Outside the barracks window, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the eastern horizon. In a few hours, regular training would resume, but Ava suspected her experience would be anything but routine. Word of the 4,000-meter shot had spread beyond the immediate training company. She'd overheard instructors from other units discussing the Montana girl who made the impossible shot. "Are you worried?" Sarah asked. Ava considered the question while applying a light coating of oil to the rifle's bolt carrier. "Worried isn't the right word. Cautious, maybe. In my experience, standing out can be dangerous. People either want to use you or prove you're not as good as they think you are." She told Sarah about high school, where her shooting ability had made her simultaneously celebrated and isolated. Male classmates had either treated her like a curiosity or challenged her constantly, unable to accept that someone who looked like their little sister could outshoot them consistently. Female classmates had often viewed her with suspicion, as if her non-traditional interests somehow challenged their own choices. College was worse in some ways, Ava continued. The ROTC program had very specific ideas about what women could and couldn't do effectively. Every time I tried to push those boundaries, I was told I was being unrealistic about my physical limitations or my career prospects. The rifle was clean now, each component inspected and properly maintained. Ava began the reassembly process, her hands moving with the confidence born of countless repetitions. The familiar ritual was soothing, a connection to skills and knowledge that predated military training and bureaucratic limitations. Sarah watched the process with fascination. Growing up in urban California, she'd had minimal exposure to firearms. beyond what she'd learned in basic training. The casual expertise her roommate displayed was both impressive and slightly intimidating. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said hesitantly. "Are you planning to make the military a career?" The question struck at the heart of Ava's uncertainty. 6 months ago, she'd have answered with an immediate yes. The military had seemed like the perfect environment for someone with her skills and background structured, meritocratic, focused on mission accomplishment above personal preferences. But 6 weeks of training had revealed the gap between military ideals and military reality. "I don't know anymore," Ava admitted. "I joined because I believed in service, in using my abilities to make a difference. But if the system can't see past my gender and background to utilize my actual capabilities, then maybe I'm in the wrong place." She told Sarah about letters from home, where her family expressed pride, but also concern about her chosen path. Her father had been supportive, but worried about the military's treatment of women, particularly those who challenged traditional roles. Her mother had been more direct, warning that exceptional women often faced a choice between downplaying their abilities or facing constant scrutiny and skepticism. "My grandfather always said that talent without opportunity is just frustration waiting to happen," Ava said, cycling the rifle's action one final time before returning it to its case. "I'm starting to understand what he meant." The conversation was interrupted by the sharp blast of reveille echoing across the base. Around them, other recruits began the familiar routine of morning preparation, quick showers, uniform inspections, preparation for another day of training designed to transform civilians into Marines. But for Ava, this morning felt different. The shot at 4,000 meters had changed something fundamental about how others perceived her capabilities. Whether that change would prove beneficial or detrimental remained unclear, but she suspected the answer would emerge quickly. "Whatever happens," Sarah said as they prepared to join the morning formation, "don't let them make you smaller than you are. That shot yesterday wasn't luck, and everyone knows it." Ava nodded, but privately she wondered if everyone knowing it would prove to be a blessing or a curse. In her experience, being underestimated was often safer than being accurately assessed, especially when accurate assessment revealed capabilities that challenged comfortable assumptions about limitations and potential. As they joined the other recruits filing toward the morning formation, Ava caught sight of Colonel Harrison observing from the command building steps. His expression was unreadable, but his presence felt deliberate. Whatever came next, she suspected it would test more than her marksmanship abilities. The morning air carried the scent of gun oil and possibility as Colonel Harrison approached the firing line where Ava Davis stood preparing for her second day of training. Word of the 4,000-meter shot had traveled through the base's communication networks with the speed of gossip and the persistence of legend. By dawn, 3 different versions of the story were circulating, each embellished with details that made the feat seem either more impressive or more suspect, depending on the teller's perspective. "Davis," Harrison's voice cut through the morning routine with military precision. "You're with me today. Special evaluation." The announcement sent ripples through the assembled recruits. Sarah Chun caught Ava's eye with an expression that mixed excitement and concern. Marcus Rodriguez shook his head slightly, recognizing the tone that preceded either rapid promotion or spectacular failure. In military culture, special attention was rarely neutral. It either elevated you or destroyed you, with little middle ground. Harrison led Ava across the base to a restricted section she'd never seen before. The buildings here were older, more utilitarian, bearing the weathered look of structures that had witnessed decades of classified activities. Their destination was a concrete block building with no windows and a single steel door marked "only," with numbers that meant nothing to unauthorized personnel. Inside, the space resembled a conference room designed by people who valued function over comfort. A rectangular table dominated the center, surrounded by chairs that had seen better decades. Maps covered the walls, some recognizable as geographic surveys, others displaying information Ava couldn't immediately interpret. At the head of the table sat a woman in civilian clothes whose posture screamed military authority despite the absence of visible rank. "Davis, meet Dr. Rebecca Stone from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency," Harrison said, his tone carrying newfound respect. "She flew in from Washington specifically to meet you." Dr. Stone was perhaps 50, with graying hair pulled into a practical ponytail and eyes that assessed information with clinical precision. She gestured for Ava to sit while opening a file folder that contained more information than should have been available about a 23-year-old recruit who'd been in training for 6 weeks. "Remarkable shot yesterday," Stone began without preamble. "But what's more remarkable is your previous shooting history. Or rather, the lack of documented evidence for capabilities that clearly exist." Ava remained silent, recognizing an interrogation disguised as conversation. In her peripheral vision, she noticed Colonel Harrison taking notes, unusual behavior for someone supposedly running the meeting. "According to your file, you've had minimal formal shooting instruction," Stone continued. "Yet ballistics analysis of yesterday's impact shows precision that typically requires years of specialized training. The bullet struck within 2.3 inches of center mass at 4,000 meters, accuracy that borders on the impossible given the equipment and conditions." Stone produced a series of photographs showing the target from multiple angles. The impact point was indeed nearly perfect, confirming what Ava had known instinctively. The shot had been exactly where she'd aimed it. "We're interested in understanding how you develop these capabilities," Stone said. "And more importantly, whether they can be replicated or enhanced through our training programs." The questions that followed revealed the true nature of the Compte de Singue evaluation. Stone asked about Ava's childhood shooting experiences, her understanding of ballistics theory, her ability to estimate distances and wind conditions. The inquiries became increasingly technical, probing areas of knowledge that went far beyond standard military marksmanship training. "Tell me about your grandfather," Stone said, consulting her notes. "Master Sergeant William Davis, 3rd Infantry Division. Distinguished Service Cross recipient. Later amended to Medal of Honor after classified records were declassified in 1978. Ava's surprise was visible. Her grandfather had never mentioned receiving the Medal of Honor. The family had known only about the Purple Heart and his reputation as an exceptional soldier. Stone noticed the reaction. "Your grandfather's service record was classified for 30 years due to the sensitive nature of his missions. Between 1944 and 1945, he conducted 73 confirmed kills during deep reconnaissance operations behind German lines. His longest recorded shot was 1,847 meters using equipment far inferior to what you had yesterday." The revelation reframed everything Ava thought she'd known about her family history. Her grandfather's teaching, his emphasis on precision and patience, his seemingly intuitive understanding of long-range shooting all suddenly made sense in the context of world-class sniper training and combat experience. "We believe genetic factors may play a role in exceptional marksmanship ability," Stone continued. "Hand-eye coordination, visual acuity, proprioceptive awareness traits that seem to run in families and can be enhanced through proper training." Colonel Harrison leaned forward. "What Dr. Stone is explaining is that you may have inherited more than shooting tips from your grandfather. The military is very interested in understanding and developing these natural capabilities." The conversation that followed felt like a job interview for a position Ava hadn't known existed. Stone outlined a program that recruited individuals with exceptional abilities for specialized training in precision shooting, reconnaissance, and what she euphemistically called strategic target elimination. The language was clinical, but the implications were clear. They were discussing sniper training at the highest levels of military operations. "The program requires a 5-year commitment," Stone explained. Training takes place at classified locations with instructors who represent the best in their fields. Graduates are assigned to special operations units, where their unique capabilities can be fully utilized. Ava listened while considering the implications. The opportunity represented everything she'd hoped for when joining the military, the chance to use her abilities to their fullest extent, training with people who understood precision shooting as both art and science. But it also meant leaving behind the conventional military path and entering a world of operations that civilian families rarely understood. "I need time to consider this," Ava said finally. Stone nodded. "Of course. But we'll need a decision within 72 hours. Opportunities like this don't remain open indefinitely." The meeting ended with handshakes and the promise of additional information, but Ava left feeling more uncertain than when she'd arrived. Walking back across the base, Colonel Harrison offered insights that complicated her decision further. "That program has a reputation," he said as they passed the familiar training grounds. "People who enter it tend to disappear from conventional military channels. You might become the best sniper in the world, but your family will never know what you actually do for a living." The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine training that felt surreal after the morning's revelations. During marksmanship exercises, Ava found herself the center of attention in ways both positive and negative. Instructors watched her performance with heightened interest, looking for signs of the exceptional ability she demonstrated. Fellow recruits treated her with a mixture of respect and suspicion, uncertain whether her success reflected well or poorly on their own prospects. Sarah Shun noticed the change immediately during evening mess hall conversation. "You look like someone who's been offered everything they wanted and discovered it wasn't what they expected." Ava picked at her food while describing the day's events in terms that respected security classifications while conveying the essential dilemma. The opportunity was extraordinary, but it came with costs she was only beginning to understand. "My grandfather never talked about the war directly," Ava said. "He taught me to shoot, told stories about hunting and wilderness survival, but never mentioned combat or killing people. Maybe he was trying to protect me from understanding what those skills could be used for." Marcus Rodriguez joined the conversation with his characteristic bluntness. "Look, you've got capabilities most people can only dream about. The question is whether you want to use them to serve your country, or spend the next 20 years frustrated that nobody appreciates what you can do." The observation was accurate but incomplete. Ava understood the honor of military service and the satisfaction of using exceptional abilities in meaningful ways. But she also recognized the isolation that came with classified operations and the psychological toll of missions that couldn't be discussed with family or friends. That evening, she called home for the first time since arriving at Quantico. The conversation with her parents was carefully edited to respect security requirements, but her emotional conflict was obvious even through military communication protocols. "Your grandfather would be proud," her father said when she described making a difficult shot during training. "He always said you had his eye and your mother's brain-dangerous combination in the right circumstances." Her mother was more perceptive about the underlying tension. "Something's bothering you, sweetheart. Want to talk about what you can talk about?" Ava explained her dilemma in general terms, an opportunity for specialized training that would fully utilize her abilities, but require commitments that might change her relationship with family and civilian life. The conversation that followed revealed family history she'd never fully understood. "Your grandfather came back from the war different," her mother said. "Not broken, but changed in ways that took years for your grandmother to understand. He never talked about what he'd done over there, but she knew it weighed on him. That's why he taught you to shoot for hunting and competition, not combat." The revelation added another layer to Ava's decision-making process. Her grandfather had apparently lived with the psychological consequences of using exceptional marksmanship abilities in warfare. His teaching had focused on positive applications of precision shooting, hunting for food, competitive sport, the satisfaction of technical mastery, rather than the military applications that had shaped his own experience. "Whatever you decide," her father added, "remember that capability without purpose is just potential energy. But purpose without consideration of consequences can destroy the people you're trying to protect." The phone call ended with promises to stay in touch and reminders that family support didn't depend on understanding the specific details of military service. But Ava hung up feeling more conflicted than ever about the choice she faced. Sleep came fitfully that night, interrupted by dreams that mixed images of her grandfather's hunting lessons with scenarios she couldn't quite remember upon waking. When reveille sounded at 0530, she was already awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to balance opportunity against uncertainty. The second day of Dr. Stone's evaluation began with practical shooting exercises designed to test Ava's abilities under various conditions. The tests were administered by instructors she'd never seen before, men and women whose bearing and expertise suggested backgrounds in special operations rather than routine military training. The first exercise involved multiple targets at varying distances with time limits that required rapid target acquisition and engagement. Ava's performance was flawless, transitioning between targets with efficiency that impressed even the experienced evaluators. The second test required shooting from unconventional positions while wearing full combat gear, simulating field conditions where perfect shooting positions weren't available. By midday, it was clear that yesterday's 4,000-meter shot hadn't been an anomaly. Under every condition tested, Ava's marksmanship exceeded the capabilities of shooters with years more experience. The evaluators exchanged glances and took notes with the intensity of people documenting something they'd never seen before. "One more test," the lead evaluator announced as the afternoon session began. "Moving target, 2,000 meters, windage compensation required." The target was a remotely controlled vehicle following an unpredictable path across the far end of the range. Success required not just marksmanship skills but the ability to predict movement patterns and calculate lead times that would challenge experienced combat snipers. Ava studied the target's movement for several minutes, identifying patterns in its apparently random course. The vehicle moved at varying speeds, changing direction at irregular intervals, presenting shooting opportunities that lasted only seconds before disappearing behind terrain features. Her first shot missed deliberately. She later realized the near miss allowed her to confirm her calculations while giving the evaluators what they expected to see. Human performance, even exceptional performance, included learning curves and adjustment periods. The second shot found its target with authority. That left no doubt about intentionality. The vehicle stopped immediately, its movement mechanism disabled by a precision shot that struck the exact center of its intended impact area. The evaluators' reaction was immediate and unmistakable. This level of performance extended far beyond natural ability, enhanced by good training. They were witnessing capabilities that bordered on the supernatural, explained only by the convergence of genetic predisposition, exceptional instruction, and psychological traits that couldn't be taught or replicated through conventional means. Dr. Stone appeared during the afternoon debriefing with information that changed the context of everything Ava had experienced over the past 2 days. The program she represented wasn't just seeking exceptional shooters. They were researching the limits of human capability in precision shooting and the potential for enhancement through advanced training methodologies. "Your grandfather's classified records reveal something interesting," Stone said, opening a file marked with security classifications Ava had never seen. His shooting ability improved dramatically during his service, far beyond what training alone could explain. "We believe he was part of an experimental program that enhanced natural abilities through techniques we're only now beginning to understand." The implications were staggering. Ava's inherited capabilities weren't just the result of genetics and good instruction. They might be the product of military research that had been conducted on her grandfather without his knowledge or consent. The thought that her family's legacy was connected to classified experiments in human enhancement was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Colonel Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Dr. Stone, are you suggesting that Davis's abilities are the result of genetic modification? Not modification enhancement, Stone corrected. Research conducted during World War II explored methods for improving human performance in combat situations. Nutrition, training protocols, psychological conditioning techniques that pushed the boundaries of human capability without crossing into unethical territory. But Ava sensed there was more to the story than Stone was revealing. The way she phrased her explanation suggested information being withheld, details that would change the conversation's direction if fully disclosed. What exactly are you asking me to do? Ava said directly. And what aren't you telling me about this program? Stone's expression revealed nothing, but her pause before responding suggested careful consideration of how much truth was appropriate for this stage of recruitment. The program trains individuals for precision operations that require capabilities beyond conventional military standards, Stone said finally. Missions where success depends on shots that cannot be missed under conditions that would challenge Olympic-level marksmen. The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the reality. They were discussing assassination missions where political or military objectives required the elimination of specific individuals at extreme distances under hostile conditions. Ava's exceptional abilities weren't being recruited for defensive purposes but for offensive operations that existed in the shadows of international conflict. The revelation reframed her entire military experience. The routine training she'd been participating in was designed to identify individuals suitable for conventional roles. But her demonstration of exceptional capability had attracted attention from programs that existed outside conventional military structures, operating with authorities and objectives that weren't subject to normal oversight. I need to understand something, Ava said, her voice carrying the firmness her grandfather had taught her to use when requesting honesty from people in authority. Are you recruiting me to protect American lives or to take lives for strategic purposes? Stone's answer was deliberately vague. Sometimes protecting American lives requires strategic actions against individuals who pose threats to national security. The distinction between defensive and offensive operations isn't always clear in modern warfare. Colonel Harrison looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. As a conventional military officer, he understood the ethical frameworks that governed normal combat operations. But the program Stone represented existed in gray areas where traditional rules of engagement might not apply. With respect, Dr. Stone, Harrison interjected, Davis is a Marine recruit, not a candidate for operations that exist outside military command structure. If she's being recruited for specialized training, it should be through normal special operations channels. Stone's response revealed the true nature of the program's authority. Colonel, this recruitment has been approved at levels that supersede normal military protocols. Davis's unique capabilities qualify her for training opportunities that aren't available through conventional channels. The power struggle playing out in the room was obvious to everyone present. Stone represented civilian authority that could override military preferences when national security interests were involved. Harrison embodied military traditions that valued ethical conduct and proper channels over expedient solutions to strategic problems. For Ava, the conflict represented something more personal, the choice between using her abilities within familiar military frameworks or entering a world of operations that her family might never understand or approve. The decision would affect not just her career, but her relationship with the values her grandfather had instilled through years of patient instruction. I want to speak with someone who's actually participated in this program, Ava said. Someone Who can tell me what it's really like, not just what the recruitment materials claim? Stone nodded as if she'd been expecting the request. That can be arranged, but the conversation will require security clearances that take time to process. Are you willing to commit to the evaluation process while those arrangements are being made? The question forced Ava to make a preliminary decision without complete information, exactly the kind of choice that her Montana upbringing had taught her to avoid. In wilderness situations, premature commitments could prove fatal when conditions changed unexpectedly. How long for the clearances? She asked. 2 weeks, assuming your background investigation doesn't reveal disqualifying factors. Ava considered the timeline. 2 weeks would allow her to complete more of her basic training while gathering additional information about the program through informal channels. Military communities were notorious for gossip networks that often provided more accurate information than official briefings. I'll continue the evaluation process, she decided. But I'm not committing to the program until I understand what it actually involves. Stone seemed satisfied with the compromise. Fair enough. Your training schedule will be modified to include additional shooting exercises and some psychological evaluations. Nothing that will interfere with your basic training requirements. The meeting ended with scheduling arrangements and security paperwork, but Ava left feeling manipulated rather than informed. The program clearly wanted her capabilities, but they were reluctant to provide the kind of detailed information that would allow for an informed decision. Walking back to the barracks, Colonel Harrison fell into step beside her with an expression that suggested personal rather than professional concern. Davis, I'm going to give you some advice that isn't part of my official duties, he said quietly. Programs like the one Stone represents have a way of consuming people. The training is exceptional, the missions are important, but the psychological costs are higher than they advertise. He told her about soldiers he'd known who disappeared into classified programs only to emerge years later as highly skilled but emotionally isolated individuals who struggled with civilian relationships and conventional military assignments. The specialized training that enhanced their tactical capabilities often came at the cost of broader life experiences and normal social development. Once you cross into using those skills to eliminate human targets, the psychological landscape changes permanently. The observation resonated with Ava's growing unease about the program. Her grandfather's teaching had emphasized the responsibility that came with lethal capability, but always in the context of ethical applications rather than strategic necessity. Evening, she researched everything she could find about military sniper programs through unofficial channels. Conversations with instructors who'd served in special operations revealed a consistent pattern: exceptional training that produced exceptional capabilities, but also psychological challenges that weren't adequately addressed in recruitment materials. Sarah Chun noticed her roommate's mood during their evening routine. You look like someone who's been offered a dream job and discovered it might be a nightmare. Ava explained her dilemma in terms that respected security restrictions while conveying the essential conflict. The opportunity was extraordinary, but it came with moral and psychological complexities that her previous military aspirations hadn't included. What would your grandfather advise? Sarah asked. The question struck at the heart of Ava's uncertainty. Her grandfather had lived with the consequences of using exceptional marksmanship in combat, but he'd never discussed those experiences directly. His teaching had focused on positive applications of precision shooting, suggesting that he'd deliberately chosen to shield her from understanding warfare applications. I think he'd tell me to be very careful about what I agree to do with the skills he taught me, Ava said finally. And to remember that capabilities don't create obligations, choices do. The conversation was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. A woman in civilian clothes appeared in the barracks doorway. Creating these detailed military stories requires extensive research and careful attention to authenticity. If you're enjoying Ava's journey, please like this video and subscribe for more inspiring stories of exceptional individuals. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. With the bearing of someone accustomed to accessing restricted areas without challenge. She was perhaps 35, with the kind of physical conditioning that suggested ongoing tactical training rather than gymnasium fitness. Davis, I'm Captain Jennifer Walsh, retired. Dr. Stone asked me to speak with you about the program you're considering. Walsh's appearance answered Ava's request for contact with someone who'd actually participated in the classified training. But her presence in the barracks after normal hours suggested urgency that was either genuine or manufactured to create pressure for quick decisions. Let's take a walk, Walsh suggested. Some conversations are better conducted away from official facilities. The three women left the barracks and walked toward the base perimeter, where conversation was less likely to be monitored or overheard. Walsh's directness was refreshing after Dr. Stone's careful evasions and bureaucratic language. The program will make you the best shooter in the world, Walsh began without preamble. The training is incredible, the equipment is state-of-the-art, and the missions are important enough to justify the resources invested in your development. She paused before continuing with observations that revealed the program's hidden costs. But you'll spend 5 years of your life in environments where normal relationships are impossible. Your family will know you're alive, but never understand what you actually do for work. And you'll develop skills that are extremely difficult to apply in civilian contexts after your service ends. Walsh described training facilities that existed in locations not found on public maps, instructors whose expertise came from decades of classified operations, and mission parameters that pushed the boundaries of international law while serving strategic objectives that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. The psychological evaluation is designed to identify people who can handle long-term isolation and moral ambiguity, Walsh continued. They're looking for individuals who can make lethal decisions based on intelligence reports rather than immediate threat assessment. The distinction was crucial. Conventional military snipers eliminated targets who posed direct threats to friendly forces. The program Walsh described trained people to eliminate targets based on strategic intelligence that might be inaccurate or incomplete. How do you live with that? Ava asked directly. Walsh's answer was both honest and disturbing. You learn to trust the intelligence apparatus and focus on mission execution rather than strategic justification. The alternative is paralysis that makes you ineffective in situations where effectiveness is literally a matter of life and death. They walked in silence while Ava processed information that confirmed her worst suspicions about the program's true nature. The opportunity was everything she'd dreamed of in terms of utilizing her capabilities, but it came with moral compromises that her grandfather's teaching had never prepared her to consider. Why are you telling me this? Ava asked finally. Dr. Stone is clearly invested in recruiting me for this program. Walsh's answer revealed the complexity of loyalties within the military intelligence community. Because I wish someone had given me complete information before I made my decision. The program serves important national security objectives, but it consumes people in ways that aren't adequately explained during recruitment. She described the psychological toll of operations, where success was measured in strategic outcomes rather than immediate tactical results. Eliminating targets at extreme distances created emotional disconnection from the human cost of precision shooting, but it also created psychological isolation that was difficult to overcome after returning to civilian life. Your grandfather understood something important, Walsh continued. He used his exceptional abilities in combat when necessary, but he didn't let those experiences define his entire relationship with shooting. The program tends to consume your entire identity rather than enhancing specific capabilities. The conversation ended with Walsh providing contact information for additional resources, but Ava already knew her decision was becoming clear. The program offered unparalleled training and the chance to use her abilities at their highest levels, but it required moral and psychological compromises that conflicted with the values her family had instilled. Walking back to the barracks, Sarah Chun offered observations that helped clarify Ava's thinking. It sounds like they want to turn you into something your grandfather deliberately chose not to become. The insight was accurate and decisive. Her grandfather had possessed exceptional military capabilities, but he'd chosen to focus his post-service life on positive applications of those skills. His teaching had emphasized responsibility, ethics, and the importance of maintaining connections to civilian values, even when developing lethal capabilities. That night, Ava wrote a letter to her parents that couldn't be sent due to security restrictions, but helped clarify her own thinking. The opportunity was extraordinary, but it required abandoning the moral framework that had shaped her understanding of capability and responsibility. When Dr. Stone requested her decision the following morning, Ava was prepared with an answer that surprised everyone involved in the recruitment process. "I'm honored by the opportunity," she said formally, "but I'm choosing to decline participation in the program." Stone's reaction revealed how invested the military intelligence community had become in recruiting her unique capabilities. "Davis, this opportunity won't be available indefinitely. Are you certain you want to abandon the chance to fully develop your exceptional abilities?" Ava's response drew on everything her grandfather had taught her about the relationship between capability and character. "My abilities are already fully developed for the purposes I choose to use them. What you're offering would change those purposes in ways that conflict with my values." The decision created immediate consequences she hadn't anticipated. Colonel Harrison informed her that declining the classified program meant returning to conventional training, tracks that might not fully utilize her marksmanship abilities. Dr. Stone suggested that her decision demonstrated immaturity in understanding national security requirements, but Ava felt confident that she'd made the right choice for reasons her grandfather would have understood and approved. Exceptional capability created opportunities, but it didn't create obligations to use those capabilities in ways that conflicted with personal values and ethical frameworks. The events of the past week had revealed possibilities she'd never imagined, and forced decisions she'd never expected to face. But they'd also confirmed that her grandfather's teaching had prepared her not just to shoot with exceptional accuracy, but to think clearly about the responsibilities that came with lethal capabilities. The morning after Ava declined the classified program, Colonel Harrison appeared at her barracks door with an expression that mixed respect with genuine concern. Word of her decision had already traveled through the command structure, generating reactions that ranged from admiration for her principles to frustration over missed opportunities for strategic advantage. "Davis, we need to talk," Harrison said, his tone suggesting official business rather than casual conversation. "There have been some developments overnight that change your situation significantly." He led her to the same conference room where Dr. Stone had conducted her recruitment pitch, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Instead of classified documents and psychological evaluations, the table held copies of newspaper articles, military journals, and what appeared to be official correspondence from Washington. "Your story has leaked," Harrison said without preamble. "Someone with access to the base documented your 4,000-meter shot and provided information to military journalists. The story is being picked up by mainstream media as an example of exceptional individual capability being underutilized by military bureaucracy." Ava scanned the headlines with growing disbelief. "Montana recruit achieves impossible shot, challenges military gender assumptions. Small-town woman outperforms career snipers at Quantico. The shot heard round the Pentagon. When natural talent meets institutional prejudice." The articles contained details that should have been restricted to official channels: her background, her grandfather's service record, even quotes from unnamed sources describing the recruitment attempt by Dr. Stone's program. Someone with significant access had decided to make her story public for reasons that weren't immediately clear. The Pentagon is furious about the security breach, Harrison continued. But they're also dealing with public relations pressure. To explain why someone with your capabilities was being tracked toward communications rather than specialized training. He showed her letters from members of Congress requesting information about military policies regarding gender discrimination and capability utilization. Women's rights organizations had seized on her story as evidence of institutional bias that prevented optimal use of human resources. Veterans groups were demanding investigations into why exceptional individual capability wasn't being properly recognized and developed. There's more, Harrison said, producing a letter with official Pentagon letterhead. The Secretary of Defense has requested a full review of your case and the circumstances surrounding your recruitment experience. You're being asked to testify before a congressional subcommittee next week. The prospect of becoming a public symbol for military policy debates was terrifying. Ava had joined the military to serve her country, not to become a poster child for institutional reform or gender equality initiatives. "Sir, I never wanted this kind of attention," she said. "I just wanted to use my abilities to serve effectively." Harrison's expression suggested sympathy for her predicament. Unfortunately, Davis, sometimes individual stories become catalysts for larger conversations about institutional practices. Your case has highlighted inconsistencies in how the military identifies and develops exceptional capability. He explained that her situation had exposed uncomfortable truths about military personnel management. The same institution that spent millions of dollars recruiting and training special operations personnel had initially categorized someone with world-class shooting ability as suitable primarily for administrative roles. The irony was particularly pointed because military effectiveness depended on identifying and utilizing individual capabilities optimally. Her story suggested that bureaucratic assumptions about gender and background sometimes prevented recognition of exceptional ability, resulting in strategic resources being misallocated. What happened with Dr. Stone's program also raised questions. Harrison continued. Congressional staffers are asking why classified programs recruit individuals through irregular channels rather than normal military promotion systems. The security breach had revealed information about recruitment practices that operated outside traditional military oversight. Stone's program apparently had authority to identify and recruit personnel without going through normal command channels, raising concerns about accountability and appropriate use of military resources. The bottom line is that your case has become a lightning rod for debates about military culture, gender policy, and personnel management, Harrison said. Whether you wanted it or not, you're now a public figure whose decisions will be scrutinized by people with various political agendas. Ava felt overwhelmed by the transformation from anonymous recruit to national news subject. The privacy that had protected her family and allowed her to develop her capabilities without external pressure was now gone, replaced by public attention that would affect every future decision. "What does this mean for my military service?" she asked. Harrison's answer revealed how dramatically her situation had changed. "You have options now that didn't exist a week ago. The public attention has created political pressure to ensure you're given opportunities that match your demonstrated capabilities." He outlined possibilities that ranged from immediate transfer to elite military units to fast-track promotion programs designed to showcase the military's commitment to merit-based advancement. The institution that had initially underutilized her abilities was now eager to demonstrate that exceptional performance was recognized and rewarded appropriately. But the opportunities came with complications that weren't immediately obvious. Public attention meant that her performance would be constantly scrutinized as evidence for or against various political arguments about military policy. Success would be celebrated as proof that the system worked, while failures would be used to justify opposing positions. "There's something else you should know," Harrison said, producing a folder marked with security classifications. The investigation into the information leak revealed some interesting details about how your grandfather's service record was handled. The folder contained documents that had been classified for decades, but were now being reviewed due to congressional inquiries prompted by her case. Her grandfather's Medal of Honor had apparently been downgraded to a Purple Heart due to the classified nature of his missions, but recent declassification efforts were restoring the original recognition. Your grandfather's shooting records were documented but buried in classified files, Harrison explained. He was apparently part of an experimental program that tested enhanced training methodologies for precision shooters. The program was discontinued after the war, but the performance data was preserved. The revelation explained much about her grandfather's exceptional teaching ability and his reluctance to discuss his wartime experiences. He'd been part of cutting-edge research into human performance enhancement, using techniques that had been decades ahead of their time. According to these records, your grandfather achieved shots at distances that weren't officially acknowledged until decades later, Harrison continued. His longest confirmed kill was actually 2,847 meters, not the 1,847 meters mentioned in his public service record. The information reframed everything Ava understood about her family legacy. Her grandfather hadn't just been an exceptional soldier, he'd been part of experimental programs that pushed the boundaries of human capability in ways that weren't publicly acknowledged until recently. The researchers who worked with your grandfather documented genetic factors that seemed to contribute to exceptional marksmanship ability, Harrison said. Hand-eye coordination, visual processing speed, proprioceptive awareness traits that appear to be heritable and can be enhanced through proper training. The scientific validation of her inherited capabilities was both satisfying and unsettling. Her exceptional performance wasn't just the result of good instruction and natural talent. It was the product of genetic advantages that had been identified and studied by military researchers. "What does this mean practically?" Ava asked. Harrison's answer revealed the full scope of how her situation had changed. "It means you're now valuable not just for your individual capabilities, but as a case study for understanding and developing similar abilities in other personnel. The military research establishment is very interested in working with you." The prospect of becoming a research subject was almost as concerning as the earlier recruitment attempt by Dr. Stone's program. Both situations involved using her capabilities for purposes beyond conventional military service, but in ways that might not align with her personal goals and values. "I want to complete my basic training and serve as a regular Marine," Ava said firmly. "I'm not interested in becoming a test subject or a symbol for political debates." Harrison's expression suggested that her preferences might not be the determining factor in decisions about her future. Davis, sometimes individual desires have to be balanced against institutional needs and national interests. Your case has created opportunities for advancing military effectiveness that extend far beyond your personal service. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a man in civilian clothes whose bearing immediately identified him as someone with significant authority. He introduced himself as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense James Morrison, apparently sent from Washington to assess the situation personally. Morrison's presence transformed the meeting from a briefing into a high-level strategy session. He brought with him information about congressional hearings, media coverage, and policy discussions that were being conducted at the highest levels of military leadership. "Ms. Davis," Morrison began, "your situation has highlighted systemic issues in how the military identifies and develops exceptional individual capability. The Secretary of Defense is personally interested in ensuring that your case demonstrates the institution's commitment to merit-based advancement." He outlined a plan that would fast-track her through basic training while providing specialized instruction that matched her demonstrated abilities. The proposal included assignment to elite units, advanced training opportunities, and leadership development programs that would showcase military investment in exceptional performers. The plan also includes research participation that would help us understand and replicate the factors that contribute to your exceptional capabilities. Morrison continued, "Your grandfather's service record suggests that genetic and training factors can combine to produce capabilities that exceed normal human limitations." Ava listened while recognizing that her individual preferences were being subordinated to institutional and political objectives. The military wanted to use her story to demonstrate progressive policies while studying her capabilities to improve overall institutional effectiveness. "What if I prefer to serve in conventional roles without special attention or research participation?" she asked. Morrison's answer was diplomatically phrased but clearly indicated that her preferences were secondary to broader objectives. "Ms. Davis, your exceptional capabilities represent strategic assets that serve national security interests. While we respect individual preferences, we also have obligations to utilize human resources optimally." The euphemistic language couldn't disguise the reality. Her demonstrated abilities had created expectations and obligations that extended beyond personal choice. The military investment in identifying and developing her capabilities created institutional interests that might override individual preferences. Colonel Harrison attempted to moderate the discussion by focusing on practical considerations. "Mr. Morrison, Davis has consistently demonstrated both exceptional capability and sound judgment. Perhaps we should consider how to utilize her abilities in ways that align with her personal values and career objectives." Morrison's response revealed the political pressures that were driving decision-making about her case. "Colonel, congressional staffers are asking pointed questions about military utilization of human resources. We need to demonstrate that exceptional capability is recognized and developed appropriately, regardless of gender or background." The conversation continued with increasing emphasis on institutional needs rather than individual preferences. Ava found herself being discussed as a strategic asset whose optimal utilization required careful balancing of political, institutional, and operational considerations. "I need time to consider these options," she said finally, recognizing that immediate decisions might not serve her long-term interests. Morrison agreed to a 48-hour decision period, but his tone suggested that delay might not be practical given the external pressures surrounding her case. Congressional hearings were scheduled, media attention was intensifying, and military leadership needed to demonstrate responsive action to public concerns about institutional practices. Walking back to the barracks, Ava felt overwhelmed by the transformation of her situation from personal military service to national policy debate. The privacy and autonomy she'd valued had been replaced by public scrutiny and institutional expectations that might determine her future. Regardless of personal preferences, Sarah Chun was waiting with news that complicated the situation further. "You've got reporters calling the base asking for interviews. Someone leaked your personal information, including your family's contact details." The security breach extended beyond military channels to include personal information that put her family at risk of unwanted attention. Reporters were apparently contacting her parents in Montana, seeking background information and family perspectives on her military experience. "There's more," Sarah continued. "Some of the other recruits are getting weird about the attention you're receiving. A few think you're getting special treatment that undermines the fairness of training. Others are worried that associating with you might affect their own evaluations." The social dynamics of military training were being disrupted by external attention that created advantages and disadvantages Ava had never sought. Her exceptional performance was being interpreted through political and social lenses that had nothing to do with military effectiveness or individual capability. That evening, she managed to call home through official channels, finding her parents dealing with their own version of unwanted attention. Reporters had appeared at the ranch asking questions about her childhood, her grandfather's influence, and family perspectives on military gender policies. "We're proud of what you've accomplished," her father said, "but we're worried about what this attention means for your safety and privacy." Some of these reporters seem more interested in creating controversy than understanding the actual situation. Her mother was more direct about the family's concerns. "Sweetheart, we raised you to use your abilities responsibly and ethically. Don't let other people's political agendas force you into decisions that compromise your values." The conversation reinforced Ava's conviction that her choices should be based on personal values and long-term objectives rather than external pressures or institutional expectations. But it also highlighted how individual decisions in military contexts often carried consequences that extended far beyond personal preferences. 6 months after the 4,000-meter shot that changed everything, Ava Davis found herself standing before the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Personnel, sworn in to provide testimony about military talent identification and development practices. The ornate hearing room was packed with congressional staffers, military officials, journalists, and advocacy group representatives, all focused on her story as a lens through which to examine broader institutional issues. Sergeant Davis, Chairman. Representative Patricia Williams began, using the rank Ava had earned through an accelerated promotion program designed to demonstrate military responsiveness to exceptional performance. "Thank you for your service and for agreeing to share your experiences with this committee." The months since her initial notoriety had been a whirlwind of training, evaluation, and public attention that had transformed her from anonymous recruit into a symbol of military reform. She'd completed basic training with honors while participating in specialized programs designed to optimize her unique capabilities. The balance between individual development and institutional objectives had been carefully managed, but the tension remained. "Sergeant Davis, please describe for the committee how your exceptional marksmanship abilities were initially received by military training personnel," Representative Williams requested. Ava's testimony was carefully prepared to focus on systemic issues rather than individual criticism, but the facts spoke clearly about institutional blind spots that had nearly wasted exceptional capability. "Ma'am, my initial military occupational specialty assignment was communications. Despite demonstrated shooting ability that exceeded instructor qualifications," Ava began. "The assessment process focused on demographic characteristics and standardized test results rather than demonstrated capability in relevant skill areas." She described the disconnect between military needs for precision shooters and personnel systems that categorized individuals based on assumptions rather than empirical performance data. Her case had revealed gaps between theoretical commitment to merit-based advancement and practical implementation of talent identification procedures. Representative James Patterson, the subcommittee's ranking minority member, focused his questions on the classified program recruitment attempt. "Sergeant Davis, can you describe your experience with what you've termed irregular recruitment practices by specialized military programs?" Ava's answer was necessarily limited by security classifications, but she managed to convey concerns about recruitment methods that bypassed normal military channels and oversight mechanisms. "Sir, I was approached by personnel representing programs that operate outside conventional military command structures," she said carefully. The recruitment process involved pressure to make immediate decisions without complete information about program requirements and long-term obligations. The testimony highlighted questions about accountability and appropriate oversight of classified programs that recruited military personnel through irregular channels. Congressional staffers had discovered that such programs operated with minimal oversight despite significant resource expenditures and strategic importance. Representative Maria Santos focused her questions on gender and institutional culture issues. "Sergeant Davis, Do you believe your gender affected how your capabilities were initially assessed and utilized? Ava's response was measured but honest. Ma'am, I believe assumptions about physical capability based on demographic characteristics affected the assessment process. However, I also believe the military has demonstrated commitment to correcting such issues when they're identified. She described reforms that had been implemented in response to her case and similar situations. Military occupational specialty assignment procedures now included practical skill assessments that could override standardized test results when demonstrated capability warranted different classifications. The hearing continued with testimony from military officials, policy experts, and other service members whose experiences illustrated broader patterns of talent identification challenges. Ava's case had become a catalyst for examining how institutions designed for standardization could better accommodate exceptional individual capability. General Patricia Hayes, representing the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified about reforms implemented in response to the issues Ava's case had highlighted. The military has revised personnel assessment procedures to ensure that demonstrated capability in mission-critical skills receives appropriate weight in assignment and promotion decisions, she told the committee. Dr. Rebecca Stone also testified, defending the classified programs while acknowledging that recruitment procedures needed improvement. These programs serve vital national security functions, but we recognize the need for better oversight and more ethical recruitment practices, she said. The hearing concluded with commitments to legislative and regulatory reforms designed to prevent similar situations in the future. But for Ava, the more significant changes had already occurred through her direct experience with military institutions that had learned to balance individual capability development with broader organizational objectives. Following her congressional testimony, Ava was assigned to the Marine Corps' newly established Precision Shooting Training Center at Camp Pendleton, where her role combined operational duties with instruction and program development responsibilities. The assignment utilized her exceptional capabilities, while allowing her to influence how the military identified and developed similar talents in other personnel. The training center was a compromise solution that addressed multiple institutional needs. Ava could apply her skills in operationally relevant contexts while participating in research that advanced understanding of exceptional marksmanship capability. Her teaching responsibilities ensured that her knowledge was transferred to other personnel rather than remaining concentrated in a single individual. "This is what I should have been offered from the beginning," she told Sarah Chun during one of their regular phone conversations. Sarah had completed basic training and been assigned to a communications unit, but they maintained their friendship despite geographic separation. "It sounds like you found a way to serve on your own terms," Sarah observed. "Not everyone gets to redesign their job description based on exceptional performance." The observation was accurate. Ava's situation had created opportunities that didn't exist within normal military career progression patterns. Her combination of technical expertise, public visibility, and institutional knowledge made her valuable in ways that transcended traditional occupational specialties. The training center's mission evolved to include research into genetic and environmental factors that contributed to exceptional marksmanship ability. Ava participated in studies designed to understand and potentially replicate the conditions that had produced her capabilities. Dr. Michael Chun, the center's research director, no relation to Sarah, explained their objectives during one of their regular evaluation sessions. "We're trying to determine whether exceptional shooting ability can be predicted, developed, or enhanced through modifications to training protocols and selection criteria." The research had revealed that Ava's capabilities resulted from a unique combination of genetic predisposition, environmental factors, and training methodologies that were difficult to replicate systematically. But aspects of her development could be incorporated into improved training programs that enhanced performance for personnel with more typical capability levels. Your grandfather's training methods were decades ahead of their time, Dr. Chun explained. He intuitively understood principles about motor learning, visual processing, and stress management that we're only now able to validate scientifically. The research also revealed information about her grandfather's wartime service that filled gaps in family knowledge. Master Sergeant William Davis had been part of experimental programs that tested cutting-edge approaches to human performance enhancement, using techniques that formed the foundation for modern special operations training. His shooting records indicate capabilities that exceeded anything officially acknowledged at the time, Dr. Chun continued. The program he participated in was classified not just for security reasons, but because the performance levels achieved challenged contemporary understanding of human limitations. Learning about her grandfather's true service record provided context for both his exceptional teaching ability and his reluctance to discuss combat experiences. He'd been part of pioneering research that pushed ethical and practical boundaries in ways that weren't publicly acknowledged until decades later. The revelation also explained why her family had preserved shooting traditions with such dedication. Her grandfather's instruction hadn't been casual hobby development. It had been systematic transfer of expertise gained through cutting-edge military research and combat application. 1 year after the infamous 4,000-meter shot, Ava received notification that her grandfather's Medal of Honor had been officially restored through declassification of previously secret service records. The ceremony was held at the Pentagon with her family in attendance, finally providing public recognition for achievements that had been hidden for 70 years. He would have been proud to see how you've used the skills he taught you, her father said during the ceremony reception. But he would have been even more proud that you found ways to serve without compromising your values. The observation captured the essence of what Ava had learned through her experience with military institutions and public attention. Exceptional capability created opportunities and obligations, but individual values and ethical frameworks remained the ultimate determinants of how those capabilities were applied. Her mother was more direct about the family's perspective on her military service. You've proven that individual excellence doesn't have to be subordinated to institutional convenience. But more importantly, you've shown that standing up for your principles can change institutions for the better. The ceremony also provided an opportunity to meet other recipients whose service had been classified for decades. Their experiences revealed common themes about the challenges of serving with exceptional capability in institutional environments, designed for standardization rather than individual optimization. The key is remembering that institutions serve human objectives, not the reverse, advised retired Colonel Maria Rodriguez, whose own declassified service record revealed extraordinary leadership under impossible combat conditions. Your job is to find ways to serve effectively while maintaining your humanity. By the end of her second year at the Precision Shooting Training Center, Ava had developed training programs that were being adopted throughout the military's special operations community. Her methods combined traditional marksmanship fundamentals with advanced understanding of human performance factors that enhanced capability development for personnel across the spectrum of natural ability. The program's success attracted attention from allied military forces, leading to international exchanges that spread her training methodologies beyond American military contexts. NATO countries, in particular, were interested in assessment and development techniques that could identify and optimize precision shooting capability more effectively. Your influence is extending far beyond your individual service, observed Brigadier General Patricia Hayes during one of their regular program reviews. The training methods you've developed are improving military effectiveness at the strategic level. The general was correct, but Ava remained focused on individual development rather than institutional impact. Each student who improved their shooting ability through her instruction represented successful application of knowledge her grandfather had passed down through family tradition. "The goal isn't to create more people like me," Ava explained to a group of visiting military educators. "It's to help each person maximize their individual potential within their own capability range. Excellence is personal, not comparative." Her teaching philosophy reflected lessons learned through her own experience with institutional expectations and public scrutiny. The pressure to be exceptional had taught her that sustainable performance came from internal standards rather than external validation. 3 years after the shot that changed her trajectory, Ava was promoted to staff sergeant and given expanded responsibilities that included liaison work with military research institutions and congressional oversight committees. Her role had evolved to bridge the gap between individual capability development and institutional policy implementation. The position allowed her to influence how the military approached talent identification and development across multiple occupational specialties. Her experience had revealed principles that applied beyond marksmanship to any situation where exceptional individual capability needed to be integrated with organizational objectives. "The key insight from your case," explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh during one of their collaboration meetings, "is that institutional flexibility enhances rather than threatens organizational effectiveness. Rigid adherence to standardized procedures can waste human resources that could provide strategic advantages." Walsh had left the classified program she'd once represented and now worked with conventional military units to improve personnel development practices. Her experience with specialized operations provided valuable perspective on balancing individual optimization with institutional requirements. Their collaboration had produced assessment tools that identified exceptional capability more accurately while respecting individual preferences about how those capabilities were utilized. The system prevented situations where valuable human resources were misallocated due to bureaucratic assumptions or administrative convenience. "Your grandfather's influence extends beyond your individual service," Walsh observed during one of their research sessions. "The training methods he developed are now being used to enhance capability development for thousands of military personnel." The observation was accurate but incomplete. Ava's grandfather's true legacy lay not just in technical instruction, but in the ethical framework he provided for using lethal capabilities responsibly. His teaching had emphasized that skill without character was dangerous, that capability without purpose was meaningless. 4 years after the 4,000-meter shot, Ava received orders for deployment to Afghanistan as part of a specialized training mission designed to enhance the precision shooting capabilities of Allied forces. The assignment represented the culmination of her military development, operational deployment that utilized her technical expertise while advancing strategic objectives. The deployment also provided an opportunity to apply her capabilities in combat contexts while maintaining the ethical framework her grandfather had instilled. Her mission involved training Afghan military personnel in precision shooting techniques that would enhance their effectiveness against Taliban forces. "This is what I joined the military to do," she told her parents during a pre-deployment phone call. "Using my abilities to help other people defend themselves and their communities." Her father's response reflected the family's pride in her service choices. "Your grandfather would understand exactly what you're doing and why it matters. Training people to defend themselves is different from eliminating targets for strategic purposes." The distinction was crucial to Ava's sense of purpose and ethical clarity. Her deployment mission aligned with the positive applications of precision shooting that her grandfather had emphasized, protecting lives rather than eliminating targets. For political or strategic objectives, the Afghanistan deployment lasted 8 months and provided experiences that validated her decision to serve within conventional military frameworks rather than specialized programs. Working with Afghan personnel revealed the universal human desire for security and self-determination that transcended cultural and political differences. Your training methods work regardless of cultural background or individual experience levels, observed Major David Kim, her deployment commander. The principles you've developed seem to enhance human capability in ways that transcend specific military contexts. The observation reflected Ava's growing understanding that her grandfather's teaching methods had tapped into fundamental aspects of human potential that weren't limited to specific applications or contexts. The emphasis on discipline, precision, and ethical responsibility had broader relevance than pure marksmanship instruction. Upon returning from deployment, Ava was selected for the Marine Corps' Advanced Degree Program and assigned to complete a master's degree in human performance psychology. The educational opportunity allowed her to formalize her understanding of capability development. While preparing for expanded leadership responsibilities, her thesis research focused on the intersection of genetic predisposition, environmental factors, and training methodologies in developing exceptional human performance. The work combined her personal experience with scientific research to advance understanding of how exceptional capability could be identified and optimized. Your research has implications beyond military applications, observed her thesis advisor, Dr. Susan Martinez. The principles you've identified apply to any situation where human performance optimization is important: athletics, medicine, education, technology development. The broader relevance of her work suggested career possibilities that extended beyond military service. But Ava remained committed to completing her military obligations while using her research to improve institutional capability development practices. 5 years after the shot that transformed her life, Ava was promoted to gunnery sergeant and assigned to lead the Marine Corps' newly established Human Performance Optimization Division. The position combined operational responsibilities with research and development work that influenced military policy at the highest levels. The division's mission was to identify and develop exceptional human capability across all military occupational specialties, using lessons learned from her case and similar situations where individual potential had been underutilized due to institutional limitations. Your experience has created a new military occupational specialty, explained Colonel Harrison, who had been promoted and reassigned to oversee the division's development. We're now systematically looking for exceptional individual capability rather than accidentally discovering it. The institutional changes represented the true legacy of Ava's experience. Military personnel systems had been modified to identify and develop exceptional capability more effectively, ensuring that valuable human resources weren't wasted due to bureaucratic assumptions or administrative convenience. Her division's work had identified hundreds of military personnel whose exceptional capabilities in various fields had been overlooked or underutilized. Musicians with perfect pitch were being utilized in acoustic surveillance roles. Mathematicians with exceptional pattern recognition abilities were being assigned to intelligence analysis positions. Athletes with extraordinary physical capabilities were being developed for special operations roles. The principle is simple, Ava explained during a presentation to senior military leadership. Human capability exists across a wide spectrum, and institutional effectiveness is maximized when individual potential is accurately assessed and optimally utilized. The presentation included recommendations for systemic changes that would prevent future situations where exceptional capability was misallocated due to demographic assumptions or standardized assessment limitations. The proposals were being implemented across all military branches through policy changes that emphasized demonstrated capability over bureaucratic categories. 6 years after the 4,000-meter shot, Ava received notification that she'd been selected for officer candidate school and the opportunity to earn a commission based on her demonstrated leadership ability and technical expertise. The selection represented recognition that her contributions extended beyond individual performance to institutional improvement. Your grandfather served as an enlisted soldier, but your impact on military effectiveness justifies officer-level responsibility, explained General Hayes during the notification meeting. Your leadership has changed how the institution approaches human resource development. The commission opportunity represented a new phase of service that would allow Ava to influence military policy and capability development at strategic levels. But it also meant accepting responsibilities that extended beyond individual performance to institutional leadership and strategic decision-making. After careful consideration, Ava accepted the commission opportunity while negotiating assignment. Preferences that would allow her to maintain connection to capability development and training responsibilities. Her goal was to serve at levels where policy decisions were made while remaining connected to individual development work. 7 years after the shot that changed everything, Second Lieutenant Ava Davis stood before a new class of precision shooting students at the expanded training center that now bore her grandfather's name, the Master Sergeant William Davis Human Performance Development Center. The facility had grown from a specialized marksmanship program to a comprehensive research and training institution that advanced understanding of human capability optimization across multiple domains. Students came from all military branches and several allied nations to participate in programs that combined cutting-edge research with practical capability development. Excellence is not about being better than other people, she told the assembled students during their orientation session. Excellence is about maximizing your individual potential while serving purposes larger than personal achievement. The message reflected lessons learned through 7 years of navigating the balance between individual capability and institutional service. Her experience had taught her that exceptional performance was sustainable only when it was directed toward meaningful objectives that aligned with personal values and ethical frameworks. As she watched the students begin their training, Ava reflected on the journey that had brought her from anonymous recruit to national symbol to institutional leader. The 4,000-meter shot had been just the beginning of a story that demonstrated how individual excellence could catalyze institutional improvement when combined with persistence, integrity, and commitment to service. 3 years later, Captain Ava Davis stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed International Center for Human Performance Excellence, watching as students from 17 different nations participated in training exercises that had evolved far beyond traditional marksmanship instruction. The morning sun cast long shadows across the expanded facility that now occupied over 400 acres of what had once been unused military training ground. Below her, a South Korean lieutenant was coaching a Norwegian sergeant through the mental preparation techniques that had become central to the center's methodology. Nearby, a British officer was explaining atmospheric calculation principles to a group of Canadian students whose diverse backgrounds reflected the program's evolution from specialized military training to comprehensive human performance development. 10 years, mused Colonel Sarah Chun, who had been promoted and reassigned to serve as the center's deputy director. Hard to believe it all started with one impossible shot and a stubborn recruit who refused to accept limitations. Ava smiled at her friend's characterization, but privately she knew the story was more complex than any single moment of exceptional performance. The shot at 4,000 meters had been a catalyst, but the real transformation had occurred through years of patient work to change institutional assumptions about human potential and capability development. The center's research division had published findings that influenced fields far beyond military applications. Sports psychology programs now incorporated training methodologies originally developed for precision shooting. Medical schools used the center's research on hand-eye coordination and stress management to improve surgical training. Technology. Companies applied insights about human-machine interface optimization to develop more intuitive control systems. Dr. Martinez called this morning, Sarah continued, referring to Ava's former thesis advisor who now served as the center's chief research scientist. The longitudinal study results are being published in 3 different journals simultaneously. Apparently, our graduates are performing 34% better in their assigned roles compared to control groups who received conventional training. The statistical validation was satisfying, but Ava had learned to measure success in more personal terms. Each student who discovered capabilities they hadn't known they possessed. Each instructor who learned to see potential where others saw limitation. Each institutional policy that was modified to better serve human development. These individual transformations were the true indicators of the center's impact. Her office wall displayed photographs from 10 years of graduations, deployments, and achievements by students who had passed through programs that had evolved far beyond their original scope. A Navy SEAL who had become the military's leading expert in underwater navigation. An Air Force pilot whose spatial reasoning abilities had been enhanced to allow her to fly previously impossible missions. A Marine intelligence analyst whose pattern recognition skills had been developed to identify terrorist networks that had evaded detection for years. Captain Davis, her aide announced through the intercom, "Your 1,400 hours meeting with the Pentagon delegation has been moved to 1,330. They're requesting a full briefing on the international expansion proposal." The meeting represented another milestone in the center's evolution. Military leadership from NATO countries were discussing the establishment of similar facilities in their home nations, using methodologies and research findings developed through 10 years of systematic study of human capability optimization. The proposal wasn't without controversy. Some critics argued that military resources were being diverted from conventional readiness training to experimental programs with unproven strategic value. Others worried that focusing on exceptional individual capability might undermine the teamwork and standardization that formed the foundation of military effectiveness, but the evidence was increasingly difficult to dispute. Military units with personnel trained at the center consistently outperformed comparable units in exercises and operational deployments. The capabilities developed through the program's methodology enhanced rather than replaced conventional military training, creating force multiplier effects that improved overall unit effectiveness. 5 years later, Brigadier General Ava Davis reviewed the quarterly reports from 12 international facilities that now operated under the umbrella of the Global Human Performance Development Initiative. The program had expanded far beyond its military origins to include civilian applications in medicine, education, athletics, and technology development. Her corner office in the Pentagon provided a view of the Potomac River and the civilian world that had increasingly embraced the center's research findings. Universities offered degree programs based on the human performance optimization principles she'd helped develop. Olympic training centers used methodologies originally designed for precision shooting to enhance athletic capability across multiple sports. The transformation hadn't been without personal costs. The visibility that came with senior military rank meant that her family life was subject to security restrictions and public scrutiny that sometimes felt overwhelming. Her marriage to Major Michael Torres, a fellow graduate of the original training program, had required careful navigation of dual military career challenges and media attention that extended far beyond normal military family experiences. But the benefits were equally significant. Their 2 children were growing up in an environment where exceptional capability was recognized and developed rather than suppressed or ignored. The institutional changes she'd helped implement meant that other families wouldn't face the choice between hiding exceptional abilities or accepting misallocation of human potential. The Australian Defence Force is requesting permission to send 50 officers through the advanced program, reported Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Rodriguez, who had become her chief of staff after his own exceptional performance in logistics. Optimization had been identified and developed through center programs. The request reflected the global recognition that the center's methodologies produced strategic advantages that justified significant resource investments. But it also highlighted the challenge of scaling individual-focused training programs to meet institutional demands without losing the personalized approach that made them effective. Approved, but with the usual stipulation that they commit to establishing their own facility within 3 years. Ava replied, "We're training instructors, not providing long-term service to foreign militaries." The policy reflected lessons learned about sustainable capability development. The center's most important product wasn't enhanced individual performance, but improved institutional capacity to identify and develop human potential. Teaching others to teach was more valuable than providing direct training services indefinitely. 7 years later, the auditorium at Montana State University was packed with students, faculty, and community members who had come to hear Brigadier General Davis deliver the annual Master Sergeant William Davis Memorial Lecture. The event had been established to honor her grandfather's legacy while examining the broader implications of human performance research for civilian society. "My grandfather taught me that shooting was just an excuse to study everything else," Ava began, using the familiar opening that had become her signature approach to discussing the intersection of individual capability and institutional service. "What he really taught me was that human potential is limited more by imagination and institutional flexibility than by genetic or environmental factors." The lecture that followed traced the evolution from a single extraordinary shot to a global initiative that was changing how institutions approached human capability development. But the focus remained on individual stories, people who had discovered abilities they didn't know they possessed, institutions that had learned to optimize human potential, communities that had been strengthened by recognizing and developing exceptional capability. In the audience, her parents sat with their grandchildren, watching their daughter share knowledge that had been passed down through 3 generations of the Davis family. Her father, now retired from ranching and serving as a volunteer instructor at the center, still remembered the 8-year-old girl who had insisted on learning to shoot because she wanted to understand everything her grandfather could teach her. Her mother, who had continued teaching mathematics until her recent retirement, saw in her daughter's work the practical application of theoretical principles about learning, development, and human potential that she had spent decades studying in academic context. After the lecture, Ava walked across campus to visit the newly established Human Performance Research Laboratory that bore her name. The facility combined university research capabilities with practical training programs that serve both civilian and military applications. The undergraduate program is oversubscribed by 400%, reported Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had left military service to become the laboratory's director. "We're receiving applications from students who want to study human capability optimization from perspectives ranging from neuroscience to public policy." The academic interest reflected growing recognition that the center's research had implications for any field where human performance was important. Medical schools wanted to understand how the training methodologies could improve surgical precision. Engineering programs were interested in applications to human-machine interface design. Business schools were exploring connections between individual capability development and organizational effectiveness. 10 years later, Colonel retired Ava Davis stood in her grandfather's workshop on the family ranch in Montana, teaching her teenage daughter Emma the fundamentals of precision shooting that had been passed down through 4 generations. The old Remington 700 that had started her own journey toward exceptional capability was still perfectly maintained and accurate, its worn stock bearing the patina of decades of careful use. "Remember, little dove," Ava said, using her grandfather's term of endearment, "shooting is about understanding connections between your breathing and your heartbeat, between the wind and the bullet's path, between your capability and your responsibility." Emma nodded with the seriousness that adolescence brought to activities that connected them to family traditions and adult expectations. At 15, she was already demonstrating the genetic predisposition for exceptional hand-eye coordination. That seemed to run in the Davis bloodline, but her interests extended beyond marksmanship to include mathematics, engineering, and environmental science. "Mom, why did you retire from the military when you could have become a general?" Emma asked while adjusting her shooting position. According to her mother's instruction, the question reflected the broader curiosity that would shape the next generation's approach to balancing individual capability with service obligations. Ava had chosen to retire at the rank of colonel to focus on civilian applications of the research and training methodologies she'd helped develop. Because the most important work was transitioning from military to civilian institutions, Ava explained. "The principles we discovered about human potential apply to any situation where people want to maximize their capabilities while serving purposes larger than themselves." Her retirement had allowed her to establish the Davis Foundation for Human Performance Excellence, a nonprofit organization that provided training and research support to educational institutions, community organizations, and individuals who couldn't access the resources available to military personnel. The Foundation's work had reached communities where exceptional capability often went unrecognized due to economic limitations or institutional barriers. Rural schools received training programs that helped identify and develop student abilities that might otherwise be overlooked. Urban community centers offered resources for young people whose potential exceeded the opportunities available in their immediate environments. "The goal isn't to create more soldiers," Ava continued, watching her daughter's form improve with each shot. "It's to help people understand and develop whatever capabilities they possess, then apply those capabilities to serve their communities and their own sense of purpose." Emma's next shot struck within an inch of the bullseye at 300 yards, exceptional performance for someone her age, but not surprising given her genetic heritage and quality of instruction. More importantly, her reaction to the shot demonstrated the emotional regulation and ethical framework that her mother considered more important than technical capability. "That felt right," Emma said, cycling the bolt and preparing for her next shot. Like everything was connected and working together. The observation suggested that she was beginning to understand the deeper lessons about human performance optimization that transcended specific skills or applications. The ability to recognize and achieve states of optimal performance was more valuable than any particular capability, because it could be applied to whatever challenges and opportunities life presented. As they packed up the shooting equipment and walked back toward the house, Ava reflected on the 20-year journey that had begun with one impossible shot and evolved into a global initiative that was changing how institutions approached human potential. The story hadn't ended with her retirement from military service. It had entered a new phase where civilian applications of military research were creating opportunities for millions of people whose capabilities had never been accurately assessed or optimally developed. 15 years later, the Montana Ranch had become an unofficial pilgrimage destination for educators, researchers, and policymakers who wanted to understand the origins of the human performance optimization movement that had transformed approaches to capability development worldwide. Visitors came to see where it all began and to meet the woman whose refusal to accept institutional limitations had catalyzed changes that extended far beyond military applications. Ava, now in her 50s, spent her mornings working on the second volume of her memoirs, while her afternoons were devoted to mentoring the next generation of researchers and practitioners who were expanding the field into areas she had never imagined. Her daughter Emma had graduated from MIT with degrees in bioengineering and cognitive science, then completed specialized training that qualified her to lead the Foundation's research into genetic and environmental factors that contributed to exceptional performance. The work combined cutting-edge scientific methods with practical applications that served communities where potential often went unrecognized. The applications keep expanding, Emma reported during one of their weekly strategy meetings. Medical schools are using our training methods to improve diagnostic accuracy. Architecture firms want to enhance spatial reasoning capabilities in their designers. Even symphony orchestras are interested in our research on auditory processing and motor coordination. The breadth of applications reflected the universal relevance of principles about human potential that had been discovered through decades of systematic research and practical experimentation. The focus on individual capability optimization, combined with ethical frameworks that emphasize service to larger purposes, had proven applicable to any field where human performance was important, but the most significant impact might have been cultural rather than technical. The movement had changed social attitudes about human potential, encouraging people to seek and develop capabilities they might never have imagined they possessed. "Your grandfather would be amazed," Ava's father commented during one of their evening conversations on the ranch's front porch. At 92, he still maintained the shooting skills and outdoor knowledge that had shaped the family's traditions, but he also understood how those traditions had evolved into something far larger than anyone could have anticipated. He would be proud, Ava corrected, but not amazed. He understood that capability was just the beginning. What mattered was how you chose to use it and who you chose to serve. As the sun set over the Montana landscape that had shaped 4 generations of the Davis family, Ava reflected on the enduring truth her grandfather had taught through patient instruction and personal example. Exceptional capability was meaningful only when it was applied with wisdom, integrity, and commitment to purposes that transcended individual achievement. The 4,000-meter shot that had started everything was now remembered, primarily as a symbol of what became possible when institutions learned to recognize and develop human potential rather than constraining it within arbitrary limitations. But for Ava, the real legacy lived in the millions of people worldwide who had discovered capabilities they didn't know they possessed and learned to apply those capabilities in service of their communities and their deepest values. The story that began with one young woman's refusal to accept institutional limitations had evolved into a global movement that was changing how human societies approach the development and utilization of individual potential. And in the quiet moments between teaching, writing, and planning for the future, Ava knew that her grandfather's most important lesson had been successfully passed to the next generation, that capability without character was meaningless. But capability guided by wisdom and service could change the world. The phone rang, interrupting the evening quiet. It was the president's science advisor, calling to discuss a new initiative that would apply human performance optimization principles to addressing climate change challenges. Another generation, another application, another opportunity to prove that individual excellence could catalyze institutional improvement when combined with persistence, integrity, and commitment to service. "Ma'am," the advisor began, "we have a situation that requires exceptional capability guided by exceptional judgment. Are you available to help us solve the impossible?" Ava smiled, recognizing the familiar pattern that had shaped her entire adult life. Impossible problems required exceptional solutions, and exceptional solutions emerged when institutional flexibility met individual capability, guided by ethical frameworks that prioritize service over personal advancement. "I'll need to know more about the specific requirements," she replied. "But yes, I'm available to help. That's what we do, turn the impossible into the inevitable, one precisely aimed solution at a time." As she ended the call and prepared to return to a world where exceptional capability was increasingly recognized as the key to addressing humanity's greatest challenges, Ava offered a silent thanks to the grandfather who had taught her that shooting was just an excuse to study everything else, and that everything else was ultimately about serving purposes larger than yourself with whatever capabilities you were fortunate enough to possess. Walking back into the house, she found Emma at the kitchen table, working on college applications that would determine her own path towards serving something larger than herself. The next generation was ready to carry forward the lessons learned through decades of proving that individual excellence, when guided by wisdom and ethical purpose, could transform not just personal trajectories but entire institutions. The 4,000-meter shot that had started it all now seemed like ancient history, a single moment that had opened doors to possibilities none of them could have imagined. But the real legacy wasn't the shot itself, or even the global movement it had inspired. It was the simple truth her grandfather had known all along, that every person possessed capabilities they'd never discovered, and that discovering those capabilities was just the beginning of a lifelong journey toward service, purpose, and the quiet satisfaction of making the impossible inevitable. The story that began with one extraordinary shot had become something far more significant, proof that individual excellence, guided by wisdom and directed toward service, could indeed change institutions, communities, and ultimately the world itself. This provides proper closure by showing the legacy continuing through Emma, reflecting on the journey's meaning, and ending with thematic resolution rather than an abrupt phone call. Thank you for following Ava's incredible journey from that first impossible shot to global impact. Stories like this take tremendous time and research to craft authentically. If this inspired you, please like the video, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell for more extraordinary military stories that showcase the power of determination and excellence.